Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to UUSF Forum. I see at least one person who is new to Forum, so welcome to the Unitarian Universalists of San Francisco. I am Jeff Pekrul, and I am co-chair of the Human Rights Working Group, which is the committee within the church that presents Forum, and the other co-chairs are Melvin Starks and Dolores Perez Heilbrunn, who are here in the room. And so last Sunday was a big Sunday for us. Our committee hosted a celebration after church for passing the Apartheid-Free Communities Pledge. I hope a lot of you came to that. It was a really great meeting. If you missed it, there is a recording. And our wizard of audiovisual arts, Jonathan, is still working on that a little bit because at the end of that meeting, we played the speech from the Academy Awards when the best documentary award was given to the Israeli-Palestinian team that produced No Other Land, I believe it was called. He says that access to that video has been cut off, which is odd, right? But anyway, he's trying to get that into the video, and we'll send that out shortly. Okay, by way of announcements today, so next Sunday, we have something a little bit of a change of pace, okay? We have a speaker named Janet Kessler coming here. Janet Kessler is known as the Coyote Whisperer, and she does a lot of work with the wild coyotes of San Francisco, which you might have seen around town. I see them occasionally in Noe Valley where I live, and they live amongst us, and this is probably their land. That's the way they probably view it, so that could be an interesting presentation. That's the 23rd, I believe. And then the Sunday after that, the 30th of March, we have two young activists from the Answer Coalition coming to talk to us about, well, broadly the topic of immigration, but they are going to talk to us about how to handle deportations and how to stop them, ICE deportations and that kind of thing. This should be a good topic by some young people, which I really am looking forward to that. And I want to thank Dolores for arranging that at the last minute. We just got that one finalized. And then it will be April, and we will be trying a little bit to turn our attention to issues of the environment and climate change and such, which are super important, right? And so Larry Danos, one of our members, has arranged the first talk of April, which will be someone from a group called Future Forests. Future Forests, okay? I think those are all the coming attractions that I want to talk about at this time, just by way of protocols and stuff. So Q&A is how we do these forum talks, and that means that questions that you might have, just write them down on the cards that you'll find on the tables and the chairs, and we're going to ask them at the end. I think that this particular topic would actually be awesome for more of a discussion group kind of thing. And we have another kind of meeting, we call them global conversations, where we have it more that format. So maybe if there's enough interest, if the Q&A is interesting enough today, we could think about having a global conversations on the topic of today's session, which is racism and its legacy in this country, which is probably something that we could never talk about enough in this country. So that's just an idea. And at this time, I will ask John to come and give us our Ohlone land recognition.
We, the members of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the ancestral custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ramaytush Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place the land of our society home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We recognize that as the original stewards of this land, the Ohlone and other indigenous peoples have understood the interconnectedness of all life and maintained harmony with all of nature for millennia. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Jeff Pekrul, who's doing his presentation today. He is a member of our First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of San Francisco. He is co-chair of the Human Rights Working Group. And he refers to himself as a part-time social activist on the causes of human rights and justice. He has worked on these topics for decades. And he has been an instrumental force in establishing the Bay Area chapter of Unitarian Universalists for Justice in the Middle East. He has offered tremendous leadership to Forum, and we are so pleased to have him here today for an inconvenient reality, reflections on the civil rights movement and America's history of racism. Jeff Pekrul.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Yeah, this is my first time being the speaker at Forum, and I finally felt like I had something interesting to talk about, okay? And I did go on this tour last month of the U.S. South, a tour of sites important in the civil rights movement, and I really learned a lot and felt some things pretty deeply on this tour, and I just felt like I would share them today. And as I mentioned in my intro remarks, I think that this one would be great for a global conversations where we can have a dialogue and talk about it. We actually had several meetings like that during the tour, which were really important, I think, for helping us all to internalize and talk about it, what we learned on the tour. So maybe we could do that later. But for today, it'll be Q&A as always for our forum. Okay, so please write your questions down, and then they'll be asked of me, and I'll answer them if there are any questions. Okay, so does anyone recognize that photo in the slide? I think it is a famous photo. Yes, Judith? Right. It is a famous photo, and it is a picture of a woman named Elizabeth Eckford, who is one of what is known as the Little Rock Nine. And it was my great privilege, really, to meet her on this tour. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about her later in the presentation. She's an amazing person and really inspired me. And anyway, a little bit about what my experience was. It was a group tour. There were I think about 18 of us that went on this tour by bus around places in the U.S. South, places I had never been to before. So for me, part of the motivation for doing this was to experience this part of the country, which I just hadn't had really any experience in other than visiting, let's say, New Orleans or Savannah, which are great tourist places. But to really understand this very important part of our country, it's really fundamental, I have come to understand. So what I'm going to do is kind of a little bit of a travelogue. I'm going to take you through highlights of what I learned and experienced at each of the various places that we went to. And then I'm going to wrap up with some kind of reflections and things that I learned. All right, and let's see. This tour was run by The Nation magazine. I don't know if people have heard of that, but I'm an avid reader of The Nation. It's really, really a great news resource of a little bit left of center, progressive kind of analysis. They have speakers that are on all the famous news shows. They, Ellie Mistal, John Nichols, people like that are writers for The Nation. And they have a tour, a travel thing going on too. They run these tours. This is one of several. And I've been reading about this one for years, and they call it a tour every American should take. And so I've been reading that for years and thinking about it. And I finally decided to do the tour. And they have several other in this topic or theme, I guess you could say. They have a new one they've added that covers kind of like the Carolinas and Georgia and New Orleans, which is where the slavery trade really started. These are the first places where the enslaved people were brought to, and the agriculture and industry involving them started. And they have another tour. This is going to be the first year they'll have it in West Africa to explore that side of the whole issue. And so anyway, there were like 18 of us on the tour, and a lot of representation from California. In fact, there were 3 others from San Francisco. And one of them has joined us today, Maria Manas, who is right here. And I was chatting with Maria before the meeting, and she was telling me how she spent yesterday at an immigrant rights organizing meeting at La Pena in Berkeley. So some of you would probably like to talk to Maria afterwards, because she's really active on that issue. But it was a really great group, I thought. We had some kind of like debriefings and discussion groups as the tour went on to like talk about what we were learning and what we were feeling and everything. And it was really a good experience for me. All of us on the tour were white. And that is a fact that I think is of interest. And like one of the things I'd like to bring up towards the end of my talk is you know, how much do Black Americans actually know this history? I guess an assumption that I went into with on this tour was they all understand all about this, but that may not be true. Okay, let's see, what else do I want to tell you? The nation gave us a really great reading list for this tour before the tour started. I unfortunately didn't have any time to do any of that reading, but several people on the tour really had. A lot of people who were on it really engaged with this, okay, and took it really seriously and did a lot of reading in advance. I'd like to share that, okay, I've lived all of my life in California and Nevada, so a long way from the South. And Dolores arranged a presentation for Forum, I think it was about a year ago, called California a Slave State, if you remember that one. And it explored how, yes, there were actually a few slaves in this state and people who were returned to their owners back east and things like that. And of course, redlining and all these horrible things have occurred here. But what occurred in the South is really a lot different, I think. And so to understand this topic, I believe that one needs to kind of visit the area. So this is a motivation for me to go there. Yeah. What else I want to say here on this slide? The title. Okay, so An Inconvenient Reality. I was looking for something a little bit catchy. Pondering that now, I'm wondering if it could come off as insensitive. If so, I apologize for that, because if you were a victim of this, it's much more than inconvenient, right? The things that happen to people is a lot worse than inconvenience, right? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Bruce? All right, so right. Just in case anyone isn't familiar with the U.S. South, this tour began in Jackson, Mississippi, and it wound up in Montgomery, Alabama. So we drove by bus, the 18 of us, plus our historian, who was a really great Black historian. He's actually an attorney in Long Beach, California. And we went from there through sort of the small towns of the Delta region of Mississippi. I used to think that the Mississippi Delta referred to where the mouth of the river is, but it's actually an area on the west side of Mississippi. This is the area that gave us the blues and a lot of, all of our American culture music. And it is sadly the location of some unfortunate events, including like the lynching of Emmett Till. So we went to see some of the things connected with that. We drove from there to Little Rock. And from Little Rock, we stayed there for one night, and then we were in Memphis for 2 days. And that's this stop in the tour.
In addition to visiting the sites connected with MLK's tragic assassination, we got some culture there, because this is where a lot of amazing music was produced. So we learned about that. From there, we drove to Montgomery, Alabama, stopping on the way in Birmingham and Selma, and that was where the tour ended. It was just 1 week long. Afterwards, I also visited Atlanta, which I thought was a great way to round it up. That's obviously where MLK was from, and I wanted to see that. Now we're going to the next slide. So the nation arranged for us to meet several people who were part of these events that happened many years ago. By the way, I was born in 1962, so I was too young to really have experienced this or remember these events in real time. I can only kind of barely remember the assassination of MLK. But these folks are getting along in years, okay? So it is really like a super big privilege to have gotten to meet some of these people and hear firsthand what happened to them and what they experienced. And I'll be telling you a little bit more about each of these people in the upcoming slides. But I just want to call out that, to me, these people really are heroes. They're like some of the best of what America has produced and what they have to offer, right? Elizabeth Eckford, who I mentioned on the opening slide, and then a gentleman named Hezekiah Watkins. He was the youngest freedom rider. I'll tell you more about his story shortly. Carolyn Mall McKinstry. She was in the Baptist church in Montgomery, Alabama, which was bombed, and the 4 little girls that she was friends with died tragically in that church. Okay, so we met with her. She's an amazing person to meet, too. And this is just a list of all the museums that we went to over the course of this tour. And they were all good. They were all a bit different in every way. If I had to pick one that I would say is something that really is the best, or something that everyone should really try to see, it is called the Equal Justice Initiative. In Montgomery, Alabama, it is simply phenomenal. It's a multimedia experience. Written material on a wall. For example, they had a sculpture that occupies the floor of Africans kind of reaching out of the sea, and it's trying to memorialize the thousands and thousands
who died during the passage on the ships and were just thrown overboard, you know. And they had also holograms. There was a section of the exhibit that had kind of like jail cells, and inside of it were actors portraying African Americans, talking about why they were put in jail, trying to bring to life what it was really like for them to do that. So that is an amazing exhibit to see. And also there in Montgomery, they have another, it's another museum. It's built by the same person, I believe, who it's memorializing the lynchings. Okay, so there were something like 6,500 known lynchings in the South between the years of 1860 and 1930. So you go there, and it occupies several acres, and they have these rusted metal blocks that have the names inscribed of these people, one for every county and every state in the South, which it all happened in the South pretty much. And it's a super solemn place to visit. Yeah. So what else? Some of these places, like the Little Rock High School, they are administered by the National Park System. So they have interpretive centers there where there's a ranger on duty. Like when we went to the Central High School in Little Rock, there was a ranger there, a young woman who gave us a talk. I know that sadly she's been laid off thanks to Elon Musk and his crew. Like lots of rangers in national parks, these are probably especially on the hit list because this is the history of the country that they don't really want us to hear so much. Other places on this list here are not formally museums, but so like, for example, the Foot Soldiers Office in Birmingham, Alabama is an office of activists. It's a place where many famous activists such as Ralph Abernathy and MLK and John Lewis and others had their meetings to plan the march to Montgomery and things like that. So just being in that space, looking at pictures of them and thinking about all of that happening in the room was, to me, kind of interesting and really impactful. The Clinton Library was on the list. It is an impressive edifice and interesting exhibits. I'm not really actually sure why it was included. I guess some people believe that Clinton, I heard someone say that he was the first black president. I am not so sure that his legacy with respect to black folks is really all that impressive, but we did visit it. Okay, next slide. And so it wasn't all heaviness, all right? We did get to experience music, and we went to a recording studio in Jackson, Mississippi, where a lot of really famous R&B and like funk and things were recorded. It was neat to be in that space. In Memphis, we went to Stax Records, which is no longer a functioning record company, but it's a really great museum. And I was in there for an hour and I'd only made it like halfway through, and they were like, "It's time to go." And I'm like, "No, really?" It was so, to me, interesting because I like music a lot. We went to the B.B. King Museum, which is not far from Greenwood. And that was really fascinating just to learn about his life, and the dream for all of these, guitar players that grew up in the Delta, where they were sharecroppers living. I mean, he grew up in a shack, frankly, with no running water or electricity. It was to go to Memphis because Memphis was where you could make money and make a career for yourself. So that was B.B. King's dream, and he did it, right? What else is it going to say about this slide? I think that's it. So next slide. All right, so now we're starting with the tour part. And we started out in Jackson, Mississippi. And I just want to say a few comments about Jackson. This city made me, frankly, feel sad. It is, and several of us in the tour had the same reaction. We all commented on this at the beginning. It was like a neutron bomb went off. There's no people walking around in the downtown area of the city. I mean, we didn't visit the suburbs. I understand that they are thriving and somewhat normal, but the downtown area is just empty. There aren't even any cars driving around. It's really weird. And there are some beautiful buildings there, but I noticed as we were walking around that the backside, I could see the backside of one of those blocks and they were collapsed. So they talk about white flight. I think there's also black flight from the city, and it's a strange phenomenon. Pictured up on the top right is a formerly very famous hub of black culture and commerce called Farish Street. It's almost completely abandoned now. And one of the things our trip historian shared with us is that sort of an unintended effect of desegregation was the decimation of these kinds of black commerce hubs. There was no longer any reason for folks to go to the places that formerly were their only safe space. So over time, it has led to them becoming ghost towns, and it's sad. Yeah. The museum, the bus station. So I'm going to talk about Hezekiah Watkins in a minute, but his story was that, during the era of the Freedom Riders, when they were organizing, does everyone know what the Freedom Riders were? Okay, not everybody. So there was, at the time of desegregation, an idea that let's push the limits and get these laws changed. I mean, make it real. So people organized in the North, I think primarily, to have both black and white people decide to ride on Greyhound buses throughout the South, starting at points in the North. Mostly, I think might have started in New York or Philadelphia, heading for New Orleans. And they were going to sit together, not segregated. And so this was really controversial. And so like when they got to Montgomery, the bus was firebombed, and they had to wait a few days before they resumed it. But there were a number of these, and part of this was Freedom Summer, which is I think 1964. Maria, was it 63 or 64? All right. So Hezekiah Watkins decided to go into he tells us a humorous version of the story that he was pushed in there, but he went into the whites only waiting area for the bus station. They took him to the infamous Parchman prison, which is a notorious hellhole, apparently. And he was actually put in the death row area for doing this. He was 13 years old. He was released after a week or two, but it changed his life forever. He went on to be arrested like over 100 times for participating in Freedom Ride activities afterwards. Amazing, right? It's not open anymore, but we visited it. There's a historical marker outside. Next slide, please. Oh, I wanted to mention also about Jackson, and this relates to what I want to bring up towards the end is like, yeah, these are deep red states. How is it that that's true when there is such a high percentage of black folks in these states? And it really comes down to challenges to voting rights and things like this. But there is a spirit of progressivism in the Deep South. And so they have the mayor right there. His name is Chokwe Lumumba, excuse me for mispronouncing that. He's a democratic socialist. They've elected a democratic socialist as the mayor of Jackson. Sadly, he is under a federal indictment. I'm not going to comment on the veracity of those charges, but it's an interesting situation with that. Could you go to the next slide, please?
I'm happy to.
Okay. Yeah, so here's Hezekiah Watkins. I told you about him. He's the youngest freedom rider, the young man who sadly was put into the Parchman prison. And he came and spoke to us. We went to a meeting room. Maria, do you remember what it was called? COFO, Center for COFO. That's an acronym where a lot of different activist groups kind of did their solidarity work. And he talked to us about how, well, we talked about Medgar Evers, who we learned about next. I'm going to show the next slide will be Medgar Evers, but he was a major person at the COFO site. People have heard a lot about Ohio State. There was an anti-war protest at that campus where several students were killed. Well, they had another one at Ole Miss in Jackson or near Jackson, where several also died, and things of that nature. He told us about at the meeting hall there. And the brutalization of people by the police in Mississippi continues unabated to this day. We talked about a case that was in the newspaper just a week or two ago. I read about the Goon Squad in Mississippi. I don't know if any of you heard of this, but some of the details are really too gruesome for me to recount here. But they continue to brutalize black folks in Mississippi. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. Yes, this is a photograph. I scanned in if you've ever been to national parks, they always give you a nice brochure. This is one from the Medgar Evers home because it is, as I mentioned, a part of the national park system. Medgar Evers was an organizer, part of the Freedom Summer campaign, which I mentioned briefly, and he tried to enroll in Ole Miss to get his law degree and was not admitted, sadly, even though this was after Brown versus the Board of Education and desegregation was the law of the land. They still didn't permit it, right? He went on to help others get admitted later, so little by little, this made him a ton of enemies. And one evening, he was going home and got out of his car, and there was a sniper across the street and killed him in his driveway of this home, which we toured. There's a bullet hole right there in the wall. It went into the house, and the man who did it was a KKK member. And the trial was really brief, and he was acquitted. Okay, he admitted to it not long afterwards. He finally tried? Yes. Okay. In the 90s, he was finally convicted on the third trial. Yeah, the first two trials were all white juries, and he got off. Yeah, so that's a little bit about Medgar Evers. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I didn't list this man on the list of heroes because he was too young. He's only 5 years older than I am. And this is Sylvester Hoover and his charming wife. What was her name? Let's see. Mary. Yeah. So she served us an amazing barbecue lunch, which I didn't eat very much of that because I'm not into barbecue, but I loved the way she talked about it. She says, there are 4 ingredients in every one of these recipes, and one of them is love. She was just such a charming woman. And Sylvester then took us on a tour of Greenwood, which is the nearby community to this Delta Museum. And he has created a smallish museum just dedicated to Emmett Till. So we got to talk about Emmett Till quite a bit there. And we then visited the site of the Bryant grocery store where Emmett Till was, accused of doing something improper, and was then, kidnapped in the middle of the night and killed and thrown in the Tallahatchie River. And after that, we went to Sumner, Mississippi, the courthouse where the all-white jury acquitted the men who did this crime. And I think I might have a picture of that coming up, but just to talk about that experience briefly, that site is also administered by the park system, and we had a discussion there. So they showed us a letter which was written by the community in the 90s when there was another trial. I think they finally, getting some of the details wrong right now, but they issued a community apology, and I feel like something like that needs to be done at a national level for this country to start a really proper healing process for what's happened. Okay. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Oh, there's a picture from his Emmett Till Museum. He was talking to us about what it was like to be a sharecropper and picking cotton from the time there was light in the day until you couldn't see anymore, and how hard they had to work, and how being a sharecropper was actually hardly any better than slavery because they had to buy all their groceries from the landowner, and it was never enough. They always ended up in debt at the end of the year, no matter how many bags of cotton they picked. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide, please. Yes. Everybody had to pick a 200, Maria told me, to fill that bag, 200 pounds. Yeah. And everybody, regardless of their age, who was employed in this way as a sharecropper had to do that from sun up until sundown. Another interesting information I learned from him about this whole area was that the mechanization of the cotton producing industry was well advanced by the 30s even, which is 20 years before Emmett Till's murder. And so a lot of the folks had already moved away. They had moved up to Chicago. A lot of them had gone to that area. And, they just weren't needed as much anymore. So it was already an area in a kind of a decline in a certain way by that time. I think we're going to talk about Emmett Till in a minute, but Emmett Till's mother was from Greenwood. And so she grew up there knowing things like you weren't supposed to look white folks in the eye. You're supposed to keep your head down. If you were walking down the sidewalk, make way for them, and this kind of ridiculousness. Emmett Till was a young teenage guy who wanted to see his mom's hometown. He didn't know these things. He wasn't aware of what he was expected, how he was expected to conduct himself when he went down south. So, tragic outcome. I think we can go to the next slide now. Yeah. So here I have a photo of Emmett Till. I guess everybody probably knows the broad outlines of what happened here, right? It's pretty well known. He went shopping at this little corner grocery store out in the fields in the town of Greenwood, Mississippi, and the white shopkeeper accused him of whistling at her. And he went outside, and then he disappeared that night and was murdered. Yeah, he was killed by, I think, 3 men were found responsible, and they were acquitted. They were KKK members. Finally, in 2007, the community issued this apology, which I have on the right. It's really a great statement. And as I mentioned a little while ago, we were meeting in the courthouse where the trial took place. We read it together and we discussed it for a while, and it was really a pretty good meeting. And yeah, I really feel like some kind of statement like this at the national level would be a helpful step forward, a step towards reparations and a process of healing that still has yet to occur in this country. Let's be honest, okay? All right, so I think we can move to the next slide. Now I'm going to take you to Little Rock, Arkansas, and Mary Eckford. That's a picture of her in 1957, I believe was the year. This was 3 years after Brown versus the Board of Education, which was the desegregation order. I am not sure, we didn't discuss this, like what was happening between 1953 and 1957. I don't know, but finally, in 1957, they decided to try to desegregate the schools in Little Rock. And we visited Central High School, it's called. It is the most beautiful high school I've ever seen in my entire life. It is an amazing, huge edifice built for something like 3,100 students. It's only ever had about 2,500. But Mary Eckford was a very bright young woman who had ambitions of going to college. And she wanted to get the best education that she could. So she wanted to go to that high school. I think she wanted to study stem cell subjects, and they had famously had labs there and all the stuff she wanted to do. So she believed that, this was possible. And so I think something like 900 black kids applied to go to this and other high schools in Little Rock for that first year, but they found a million excuses to deny them to be a part of it. So they whittled it down to 9 that could go, and she was one of those 9. And one of the details she told us was like they didn't all go as a group together. They weren't like that at all. She walked by herself into this school on the first day of school in 1957, assuming that she'd be admitted and get to walk in there. She arrived and she saw that there were National Guardsmen there, and she thought that they were there to help her go inside safely. Not even close. They were there to block her from going inside. And there was a very hostile crowd of several hundred people standing across the street, and they forced her towards that crowd. And she heard one of them saying, "I've got a noose." I hope I don't become emotional talking about this. It was a little hard for me to hear her talk about it. So then she had to give up for the day. She walked to the bus stop towards the end of the block to go home to try again tomorrow. And she saw a kindly looking white woman there, and she reached out to her for some support or something, and that woman spit on her. Someone was there that helped her, who was, she told us, a member of the Communist Party who were there organizing to help the people trying to challenge the segregation. So that went on for weeks, I think, of trying to get into the school. The governor was dead set against allowing this all to happen. And finally, President Eisenhower sent in troops of some kind, and they stayed for 3 weeks and helped the kids get into the school. They went away after a while, and I guess the crowd stopped. I'm not sure if this crowd stopped coming, but they were able to physically get in. But her experience of trying to be a student at that school for that year, it just, I can't believe she wasn't able to go through with it. What she had to tolerate. She was body slammed in the hallways every day and all kinds of stuff. So I don't think she's just an amazing individual. And she spoke to us for about an hour. I think it was maybe like an hour, Maria. Yeah. And she's 83. She's 83, and she's a very, very articulate woman. I think someone asked her, like, how do you feel about all the people who did all this stuff to you all those years ago? And I don't know, I was just blown away by her humility and compassion, even for them. Not a word of anger. I don't know. She's just amazing. Yeah, so that's Little Rock, Arkansas. Now we can move on to the next slide. We'll be talking here about Memphis, Tennessee. Everyone knows that MLK was assassinated here in 1968. That is the Lorraine Motel where it happened. They've built a really great museum adjoining to it, which was a part of our experience there. I took a photo of one exhibit in there. The reason he was in Memphis at that time was to attend a labor solidarity march. There had been a very tragic incident with some of the sanitation workers there who were treated terribly, and there was some died. Okay, so they had a march there. He had just done that the day before, I believe. And let's see. Yeah, it's a great museum. Has anyone here been to that museum? I bet a lot of people have. Yeah, it's something you must see for sure. Yeah, they had inside, for example, like a recreation of the buses in Montgomery with nice statues of Rosa Parks and others who did that brave work of challenging the segregation on the buses. Okay, next slide. So this was something that they passed around to us as we were waiting to go through. I got to flip through it and look and see. Does everybody know what the Green Book is? Anybody not know? Okay, yeah. Black travelers needed one of these in those days to know where it was safe to go and where it wasn't, where it was safe to go, basically. And so I took a look at the page for San Francisco, and it had a decent number of hotels. None of them I recognized, but anyway. Next slide. All right, so now we have traveled into Alabama, and we stopped in Birmingham on our way to Montgomery that day. We just spent an afternoon in Montgomery, and we met this lovely lady named Carolyn Fall McKinstry. And I bought a copy of her book, which hopefully I'll have a time to read someday. And we met in an organizing office there where all the famous people had met to plan the march to Montgomery and so forth. And it's across the street from a park that is kitty corner to this church, which is where the tragic bombing occurred. And Carolyn told us that Birmingham had so many bombings in 1955 and 1956 that they called it Bombingham. They were happening all over the place. People's homes were being bombed and all kinds of things like that. She experienced let's go to the next slide, the brutality of the dogs being used on the protesters, the water cannons, and this kind of thing. In that park, they have got, I took a picture of this art sculpture of the dogs. She's terrified of dogs to this day. She's a devout Christian. That really came through to me in her speech. Someone asked her, what her feelings were about the people who did all this stuff, and she just responded from a point of view of Christian love, which I thought was really quite impressive. Let's see. All right, we'll go to the next slide now. Yeah, she had the water cannons using her. Okay, so picture on the right is a famous picture. There are actually a lot similar to that, but this one was taken in Montgomery. We stood approximately on the spot where that was taken. It's in a neighborhood of Montgomery called Centennial Hill, and there's a home there. This was a neighborhood of black professional class people. So we met in the home we went to the Harris home, and I believe her name was Myrna Harris. I forgot her last name, but her father was the owner of a pharmacy in the neighborhood, and their home was where a lot of these meetings took place. And this photo was taken out front of that. Inside that home, there was a really interesting exhibit of different things. And one of them was a quote from JFK, and it said, he was referring to the marchers, and it said, "Stop them." So if anyone had any illusions that JFK was really a supporter of civil rights, I think he was goaded into it. What I took away from that was like he really wasn't a hero in that dimension, at least. Sad to say it. Yeah, okay, I think we're ready for the next slide. And now we are in Selma, the famous Pettus Bridge, site of Bloody Sunday. So the marchers were marching for voting rights, and John Lewis, MLK, Ralph Abernathy, and a lot of others planned this march to Montgomery as a campaign for voting rights. And they were blocked from crossing the bridge twice, and until I think it was RFK that intervened and persuaded the government or I don't know what exactly, they had a talking with the governor to let them pass. And so they did the march finally, 51 miles. This is a picture of the highway that we drove down it to get to Montgomery. Okay, next slide. Yeah, I mentioned these two museums early in the talk at the beginning. The Legacy Museum, I bought a book there in case anyone's interested in looking at it because it's so good. And that actually, both of these pictures are taken not at the Legacy Project, but at the other one, which is not called the Lynching Museum, but that is what it is. It's a museum to the thousands of people who are known to have been lynched in the South. A very solemn place. And very good art too, I'll say. All right, let me see if I have anything else to say about this. Let's go to the next slide. This is, now we're in Atlanta, which was not a part of the tour, but I went there and I went to the site of the Ebenezer Baptist Church where MLK was co-pastor along with his father. And We also saw his childhood home, which is just down the street from that church. He was an American Baptist minister. I don't know if people are very familiar with the sort of the breakdown of different kinds of Baptists, but he was an American Baptist minister, and my father was too. And so my father used to go every summer to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, which is where they have their annual confab, kind of like the UUA meeting that happens every year. And my father told me he met MLK there once. I wish I could talk to him again to ask him more questions about that, because what I would like to really ask him was whether MLK's ideas were broadly accepted, or whether they were even discussed in those meetings, because MLK was about a lot more than racial equality, right? He was opposed to militarism, imperialism, even consumerism. He really was a deep thinker, I think, about important things and what's really going on in this country. And I think he did influence my father a bit, and so it was meaningful to me to see that. Okay, let's see the next slide. Okay, now we're getting into what I'm going to call summary and reflections, and this was something that I read on a slide on the wall in that legacy project in Montgomery, and I think it's really the truth. Okay, so the way that the Civil War ended was not decisive. They stopped the fighting, but they got enough concessions from the North to really just perpetuate the system in a different name. And it's just kind of evolved from there. This is what I deeply feel after learning all this information. And I think that acknowledging that is kind of important. We need to teach this history. This is like really important. It's something that not enough people learn. I mean, I think I learned it in lessons in high school. As I told you at the beginning, I wasn't old enough to remember these events, but I don't know if enough time was spent on it, and I bet a lot of students today are not getting educated on this. Yeah, it evolved into sharecropping, which was just really another version of slavery. From there into they called it vagrancy laws. So if you didn't have a contract to be a sharecropper, you could be arrested for that. So you were compelled to take one of these jobs that were not really jobs. And it evolved from that into Jim Crow. And then today, convict leasing is a term that I learned. That's what they used to call it. If you were arrested for not having a sharecropper job, you could be a convict leasing, sold into convict leasing. And the brutality continues to this day. Rodney King, Trayvon Martin, and the list goes on, The next slide this is my last slide, 40 acres and a mule. Have people heard this term before? I think it was said by a Northern general at the conclusion of the Civil War. There was this idea for a while that they would make things right by giving all these folks something to start out with, a chance in life, but it didn't happen. And in fact, I think that they did give compensation to white Southerners who were on the losing end of this. And that's really where a lot of problems really just continued from there. People have not gotten the generational wealth, continued into redlining and all kinds of other policies that have made life challenging for our Black brothers and sisters. So yeah, those are all the comments I have for you today, and it's probably about time for us to do Q&A.
Jeff, thank you so much for your presentation today. So if anybody does have questions, if they could write them down, we're very eager to hear questions for Jeff. And somebody wrote, was there any talk on the tour of reparations? Is there any movement in that direction in the South?
No one asked that question other than me at the very last meeting. Mary, did we discuss reparations or whether the South is taught? We did not discuss that. I think it's urgent that it become a topic nationally and wherever it can be discussed. My personal opinion.
The next person wrote, in 2002, I was in South Africa only 6 years after apartheid ended officially. I asked people of all races how they felt about the future. Almost without exception, they said they were cautiously optimistic. So the question is, on your trip, what sense did you get from people you met? Were they cautiously optimistic, fearful? Were they feeling a sense of resignation?
So I'm not sure if you meant the other participants in the trip or ordinary folks that we met
My guess is it's ordinary folks.
Uh-huh. I don't know. I guess I didn't get a chance to really mix with people on the street that much to ask that question. I remember, did we ride in the taxi together to the airport, Maria? No, it wasn't you and I, it was another person, but we had a chat with the taxi driver. I mainly remember his comments because he said, there's been a lot of change, but there needs to be a lot more. Yes, Maria? I'll repeat the comment for the benefit of those on Zoom. So Maria, who was on the trip with me, said that people we met on the trip, people on the street, said the speakers, okay, said that the struggle that was what the civil rights movement was needs to be restarted if we're going to get any more progress. Is that a fair paraphrasing? Yeah. 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 We're in the midst of a major setback of the civil rights movement, I believe, and the path towards progress. It's all very intentional, you know, the anti-DEI, the banning of the history, the closing of these park sites dedicated to this history. All of this is a part of let's don't talk about this. Let's make money, I think, you know, that kind of thing.
Does anybody else have questions? If you wouldn't mind, could you please bring them up to me? What did Elizabeth Eklund eventually do? Was she able to go to college, become a professional in science?
Elizabeth Eckford, yeah, she did get a college degree, but it wasn't probably the path that she had hoped for. I have every belief that she probably would have been one of the best and brightest at Ole Miss or any of these the best schools in the country. She told us that she got a correspondence degree or something like that, and she had a career in civil service as a parole officer and also helping people with their benefits. This came up because and when she explained those details when someone asked her like, how do you feel towards the people who did these things to you? And she said, then she got to speak about how she was working with a lot of people who were challenged in life, had been on a bad life path, you know, what it was like to work with them. What I got, she didn't say it exactly, but a lot of them were white people that were on the wrong side of the law and had been in the carceral system and stuff. And she even has compassion for them, you know. I think I didn't answer your question exactly. And okay. Yes, Maria. Let me repeat this also. So yeah, Elizabeth Eckford, they did tell us before we met with her that she has PTSD basically, and she's had it all her life, and it's probably not surprising. But you know, like they asked us to turn off our cell phones and not make any loud noises and things, and she's suffered from that.
Is true Black history taught in the South? When you were not in a structured environment, what was the vibe about equality for all?
Equality for all. Well, first of all, I thank you for that question because it reminds me that I didn't cover something that I really wanted to talk about, which was what we learned from Sylvester Hoover, the gentleman who started the Emmett Till Museum. I was amazed to learn that he, growing up right there where all this happened, he didn't know the details of it. I found it hard to believe, and I never really did get to the bottom of that. But what I think might be the case is that his parents were trying to protect him from the awfulness of the world, that it might be just too much for a kid to handle, to know that these kind of things had happened around here. And along those lines, we had some discussion in our group was like, yeah, this is an all-white tour group. Do many Black folks take this tour? And I think that our historian told us that they have tried to encourage more to do it, and they had a trip of high school students or something like that. But I believe that this history isn't even known completely in the Black community, and it sure needs to be. Okay. And then the equality for all. By all, do you mean like LGBTQ and that kind of thing?
Yeah, yes. When you were not in a structured environment, what was the vibe about equality for all?
Well, I wasn't out of the structured environment very often. We went out to that amazing blues bar in Montgomery that one night, and I was looking around a little bit, and it seemed like a comfy vibe with people mixing and stuff. I don't know. I really can't answer the question. I wasn't there long enough to really know. I'd like to go back and find out, though.
While we're waiting on the next written question, I'll just ask, what was your favorite part of this pilgrimage?
Well, meeting Elizabeth Eckford was the most impactful for me. Just hearing her story, it just moved me so much, and it made me feel what it was like to have gone through that. So that was the most inspiring thing. I am a music fan, so I found the Stax Museum in Memphis to be like pretty amazing. Um, those are a couple of things, but it's obviously a super dark topic. I had a few people say to me, like, why did you use your vacation time to do that? um, I'll go back to what they call it a tour every American should take. I really think that's true, and that's probably a good way to wrap up. I really think that this is important history for all Americans to know and to talk about. How else will we really come to a kind of a closure and a reparations, being able to set up for a reparations discussion, which needs to happen until we all acknowledge the terrible, terrible crime of slavery in this country, which is really unique in human history. I want to say that. Yes, we know that slavery has occurred in societies throughout history, but not like this. Not this organized chattel slavery where entire people were brought just because of their race and kept in servitude over generations. I don't think this has ever happened before. On this scale, to the millions of people that were kidnapped and taken, it just boggles the mind. Okay, and it is in the DNA of this country. I want to remember. Wait, one more thing. Okay, so part one of the museums that we looked at talked about how the North was the abolitionists and stuff, and it's kind of comfy and easy for some of us to believe that all the white folks in the North were innocent and not a part of this, but actually Wall Street and State Street in Boston, all of these places, all those fancy buildings and stuff, the money that built those came from the slave labor in the South. That's the truth. So this was a slave society. We are going to have something special happen at the end of this meeting, so I want to wrap up in just a minute. Okay.
Somebody has said that they are unable to write down their question. How do you feel about us changing protocol to have verbal questions?
As long as it's quite brief.
Go ahead.
Okay. My daughter teaches at Old Miss, and she's been there for about 15 years, and maybe 20. And when her kids were little, they went to school there and they lived there. And I do remember going to the kindergarten thing and all the children playing together. And I thought, oh, I mean, it was just it. I thought, oh, it's not as bad as I thought. Exactly at that point. Later, my daughter did move from Memphis. They moved down to Oxford, where her college is, instead of living in Memphis. And I think it was a little more integrated there. And I thought that was too bad that they weren't, the children when they were young, the little kids playing together. I just remember that thinking, oh, they're having this good time laughing and playing together.
So in Oxford, it was not so hopeful, huh?
Well, I don't know, because the kids are older and it's a different environment and things like that. I don't know if it's the same kind of.
Yeah. I wouldn't believe things are changing slowly. Yeah. All right.
Thank you for that recollection, Jeff. We did have two questions, but I wanted to ask, do you want to stop now or do you want us to continue with questions? What's your preference?
I think we should stop now because we have something else important to do. And yes, Robin. Yeah. Maybe when we thank you for that, Robin, sharing information about a documentary about the Little Rock Nine. Maybe when we thank you, Robert Drew.
For the benefit of people on Zoom, we will be glad to try to summarize that information. And at this point, I do want to appreciate Jeff Pekrul.
Thank you.